Rain was pouring down on Lisbon that night, streaming through the narrow streets under the glow of yellow streetlights. Inside the restaurant Beco do Ourives, the contrast was striking. Soft piano music playing, crystal glasses clinking, candles burning in golden candelabras. Among the waitstaff and customers, Felipa Andrade moved quietly, serving dishes with practiced grace. Fernando Costa, a young billionaire, was sitting at a table near the window. Well-dressed but alone, he sipped his wine while watching the storm's reflection in the glass. His attentive eyes revealed more than just wealth. There was restlessness, as if his mind was occupied with something beyond dinner. Felipa noticed how carefully he observed everything around him. For her, though, this was supposed to be just another night at work. She wore her impeccable uniform and maintained a professional smile, hiding who she truly was. Every tray she carried, every bottle she opened, was part of a carefully maintained disguise. Deep down, Felipa knew her peace was fragile, but she still clung to the routine. Customers laughed at luxurious tables, enjoying rare wines and sophisticated dishes. The atmosphere gave off a false sense of security, as though nothing could break this bubble of elegance. But Felipa, with her hidden experience, noticed every unusual detail: the nervous waiter, the door that took too long to close, the sound of the street growing louder than usual. She approached Fernando's table and poured him another glass of red wine. He thanked her with a quick smile, without looking away from the rain's reflection. In that brief moment of eye contact, Felipa sensed that this man was more than he seemed. But there was no time to unravel mysteries. Something bigger was about to happen. Suddenly, the lights dimmed for a second, leaving everyone in an uncomfortable silence. The pianist stopped, looked around, and started playing again. Felipa held her breath. Her instinct screamed that this was just the beginning of something major. She knew how to recognize signs, and this was one of them. The sound of the storm grew louder, as if echoing the coming chaos. The nervous waiter dropped a glass, and the sound of shattering crystal made some customers laugh. But Felipa didn't laugh. Her body stiffened, her eyes scanning the room for the source of that unseen tension. Fernando, without realizing it, was also on alert. He set his glass down, adjusted his posture, and stared at the main door. When his eyes met Felipa's again, there seemed to be a silent understanding between them. Something was wrong. The atmosphere, once warm and elegant, now felt like a fragile display about to shatter. Felipa discreetly brushed her hand over her apron, remembering what it felt like to be on the verge of a fight. And then, the inevitable happened.
Have you ever felt that powerful connection from just one look? Then don't miss what happens next. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon so you won't miss a single twist in this passionate, secret-filled love story.
The main door of the restaurant burst open violently, splintering the wood and slamming it against the wall. The muffled sound of the storm was replaced by screams of pure terror. 4 armed, hooded men rushed in, instantly spreading chaos among the guests. Glasses fell, chairs overturned, and the pianist ran without looking back. "Everyone on the floor now!" shouted the leader, aiming an automatic weapon across the dining room. The guests quickly dropped down, huddling under tables, shaking with fear. The upscale restaurant, which just minutes earlier had been the picture of glamour, had turned into a scene of sheer terror. Fernando stayed calm, still seated, but his sharp eyes studied every move the intruders made. He seemed less scared than curious. Meanwhile, Felipa stayed quiet, scanning the room, calculating distances, possible angles of attack and escape routes. Her body reacted on its own, as if long-dormant instincts had suddenly kicked back to life. One of the armed men walked up to Fernando and pressed the gun against his head. "You're coming with us, billionaire. Your money's gonna open doors for us." The whole room gasped in shock. It was in that moment the other guests realized who he really was. The target seemed clear: Fernando Costa. But Felipa noticed something else. The men's focus wasn't entirely on Fernando. One of them kept glancing sideways at her, almost as if he knew exactly who she was. Her heart raced, but her face stayed neutral. It was as though her cover was about to blow. The leader signaled 2 men to surround Fernando. A third began collecting phones and wallets from the guests, while the fourth kept everyone at gunpoint. The plan seemed well rehearsed, but to Felipa, every move they made revealed flaws. She took a deep breath. She knew that if she acted, there would be no going back. The peace she had built would vanish in seconds. Still, her muscles tensed up, like coiled ropes about to snap. Fernando shot her a quick, almost imperceptible glance. There was a silent plea in his eyes, not for help, but for partnership. Felipa understood. It was time to choose.
The dining room fell into a thick silence, broken only by the occasional shouts from the gunmen. Guests trembled, some cried softly. With every second, the danger grew. Felipa closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of her past knocking at her door once again. When she opened them, she was no longer just a waitress. She was the agent the world had forgotten. And the 4 men were about to find out. They had no idea what was coming. Felipa's first move was so fast that few eyes could even follow it. Using the silver tray she was holding, she knocked the gun aimed at Fernando out of the way, then spun around and struck the attacker square in the face with enough force to send him crashing to the floor. The metallic clang echoed like thunder through the chaos. The second man reacted on instinct, but Felipa was already on him. With a sharp blow to his arm, she disarmed him, then locked him in a hold that made him cry out in pain before he passed out. The entire restaurant watched in stunned silence, unable to believe that this slender waitress could move like a trained fighter. The third intruder, shaken by what he was seeing, tried to fire, but Felipa was faster. Using the unconscious body of the second man as a shield, she moved forward without hesitation. Shots ricocheted off chairs and tables, sparking panicked screams from the guests. Fernando, still seated, watched everything with a steady gaze. There was no fear in his expression, only respect. He understood that he was witnessing someone whose story went far beyond the tray and an apron. And for the first time that night, he sensed that he might not be the real focus of this tragedy. The fourth man tried to escape through the side door, but Felipa intercepted him with a spinning kick that sent him tumbling onto the marble floor. Within seconds, the entire group was neutralized, scattered among overturned tables and shattered glass. The restaurant fell completely silent. Only the sound of people's panicked breaths filled the air. Everyone stared at Felipa as if she were a ghost, a woman who had traded her waitress identity for that of a warrior. Felipa took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of rediscovering a part of herself she thought was long gone. The whole room watched in shock, but no one dared approach. She knew she couldn't explain, and worse, she knew this was only the beginning. As the guests began to collect themselves, Felipa knelt beside the fallen leader. His eyes were half closed, his face streaked with blood. With steady hands, she searched the pocket of his black jacket, looking for answers. What she found chilled her to the bone. It was a recent photo of herself, with the words, "Shut up," scrawled in red across it. Her heart raced. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just a robbery. It was a hunt. And she was the target. Fernando stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked over to her. His gaze was firm, but there was undeniable curiosity in his eyes. "They weren't after me, were they?" he said quietly, almost confidentially. Felipa didn't answer.
She just quickly tucked the photo away, as if hiding it could somehow change the truth.
The guests watched her with a mix of fear and gratitude. To them, she was a hero. But to Felipa, this was only the beginning of a new war. Her instincts told her more men were on their way, and the peaceful life she had built had just crumbled. Fernando gently touched her shoulder, making her look at him. "They came after me to get to you. This isn't over. But if you saved me, let me do the same for you." His voice was firm, almost like a promise. Felipa stared back silently. She was used to being on her own, to trusting no one. But there was something different about this man. He wasn't just some arrogant billionaire. There was courage in his words and a rare determination in his eyes. Outside, sirens grew louder, signaling the police's arrival. Time was running out. Felipa knew that once she got pulled back into this life, there would be no turning back. But ignoring the golden business card Fernando was holding out could cost her her life. With a heavy sigh, she took the card and tucked it into her apron pocket. It was the seal of an unspoken pact, an unlikely alliance that would change both their destinies. In that moment, Felipa knew her time hiding was over. Her past had caught up with her, and the war she'd tried so hard to avoid was only just beginning. The restaurant was still in shock when police officers rushed in, weapons drawn, only to find 4 subdued criminals and dozens of terrified guests. Felipa tried to blend in with the staff, but it was impossible to erase what everyone had just witnessed. She was no longer just a waitress. She was the woman who'd taken down 4 armed men in seconds. Fernando, on the other hand, remained calm. While giving a brief statement, his attention stayed on Felipa. He watched her movements, her controlled tone, the way she avoided direct eye contact. He knew how to recognize someone carrying secrets, and this woman was a mystery he wanted to solve. As the commotion began to settle, Fernando approached her. "You're not who you say you are," he stated plainly, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Felipa looked away, but didn't deny it. Her silence spoke louder than words. "They were after you, but they almost took me with them. I'm not just going to forget what happened, and I'm not going to let you face this alone." His tone carried both strength and curiosity, as if he were offering more than just help. He was offering a partnership. Felipa crossed her arms, trying to push him away. "You don't understand what you're getting into. If you stay near me, you could get killed." But Fernando simply smiled, showing no fear. "Believe me, Felipa, I have more enemies than you can imagine." Before she could respond, an officer approached and asked them both to come down to the station for further questioning. Felipa hesitated, but Fernando placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Let me handle this. Trust me, just this once."
She didn't answer, but she accepted the billionaire's offer of a ride. As the car moved through the rain-soaked streets of Lisbon, Felipa kept staring at the photo in her pocket. The red words burned into her mind like a warning. There was no turning back now. Alone in her small apartment that night, Felipa couldn't sleep. The rain still tapped against the windows, reminding her of how the nightmare began. She laid out a box she'd kept hidden for years, one filled with memories of a life she swore she'd left behind. Inside were fake IDs, a deactivated handgun, and newspaper clippings about mysterious operations. Each item was a piece of the life she'd abandoned, the life of an agent for the very organization that was now hunting her. Felipa remembered the brutal training, the impossible missions, the orders she'd followed without question. She had run when she realized she was nothing more than a disposable piece in a larger power game. She faked her death, changed her identity, and built a simple life as a waitress. For years, she thought she'd escaped, but the photo she found in the intruder's pocket proved otherwise. Felipa walked over to the mirror and studied her reflection. The plain uniform hid the warrior still living inside her. You tried to bury who you were, she whispered to herself, but they never stopped looking. Meanwhile, in his mansion, Fernando was reviewing security reports and speaking with discreet contacts. He didn't just see a mysterious woman, he saw an opportunity. If she had enemies, maybe they were the same ones who'd been trying to undermine his business for years. Deep down, he knew he needed her just as much as she might need him. And for the first time in years, Fernando Costa didn't feel alone in his own private war. Felipa, on the other hand, understood that letting him get close could be her downfall. But as she stared at the photo on her table, she realized an unavoidable truth. Her past wasn't hunting her out of revenge. They were hunting her to keep her quiet. And she couldn't run forever. The next morning, Felipa walked through streets still glistening from the storm. She'd left her waitress uniform behind. Now she wore simple clothes, trying to blend into the crowd. But her mind stayed on high alert. With every strange glance, every car that slowed down, she wondered if the organization had already found her again. When she stepped into the corner cafe, she found Fernando waiting for her as if he'd known exactly where she'd be. He wore a sharp suit, but there were dark circles under his eyes, a sign he hadn't slept either. On the table sat 2 steaming coffees and a thick envelope.
"They're not going to stop, Felipa," he said without hesitation. "I did some digging of my own. Your old organization has connections in multiple countries, and now they're moving fast." He slid the envelope toward her. Inside were photos, reports, and records of suspicious financial activity. Felipa frowned, surprised by how much he'd uncovered. "You shouldn't be involved in this, Fernando. If you keep pushing, you'll end up dead." But he smiled, almost defiantly. "If they want you, they'll have to go through me. And if they want to take me down, they'll have to face you too. We're both in this now, whether you like it or not." She took a deep breath, fighting the urge to turn down his help. But the truth was clear. On her own, she didn't stand a chance. Finally, she reached out and shook his hand, sealing their unspoken pact. Fernando gripped it firmly, satisfied. "Good. Then we start together." In that moment, Felipa knew there was no more running away. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about fighting back. Fernando's mansion felt like a safe refuge, with armed guards and high-tech security protecting every entrance. But Felipa didn't trust walls or cameras. She knew determined enemies always found a way in, and it didn't take long for her to be proven right. That night, the security system went down for just a few seconds, enough time for a group of masked men to sweep through the grounds. Alarms blared, and the mansion plunged into chaos. Felipa was the first to react, pulling Fernando into a reinforced safe room. But these intruders were better equipped than the ones at the restaurant. They were armed with explosives, ready to tear everything down to capture or kill their targets. Felipa moved like a shadow through the halls, confronting them with whatever she could find, turning the environment itself into her weapon. Fernando, hidden behind a bulletproof wall, watched on the monitors as she fought with terrifying precision. Every move was calculated. Every strike landed exactly where she intended. He understood now. Felipa wasn't just a survivor. She was a warrior, trained to win. Even so, the fight was intense. One of the attackers broke through to the room where Fernando was hiding. Just as he was about to fire, Felipa appeared behind him and took him down with a single devastating blow. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by their ragged breathing. Fernando stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You saved my life again. Now do you see why we need each other?" Exhausted, Felipa could only nod. She couldn't deny it any longer. They were bound together now. By the time the last attacker was subdued and security regained control, Felipa knew the war had officially begun.
the organization wouldn't stop, and the next attack would be even more brutal.
Over the next few days, the tension between them grew heavier than ever. Clara avoided personal conversations, but the emotion in her eyes gave away the storm raging inside. Leo waited patiently for a chance to explain himself more fully, though he knew one wrong word could push her away for good. When she was alone, Clara found herself revisiting the past. Memories of their painful breakup now mingled with Leo's recent revelation. For years, she'd believed she'd been lied to, used, and discarded. Now she understood he had been trying to protect her, but in a twisted, hurtful way. Anger and compassion tangled inside her. During another tense meeting, Clara finally snapped. "You took away my right to choose. You pretended to be a monster when you could have trusted me. You didn't save my life, Leo. You broke part of it." Her words hung in the silent room, hitting him like knives. Leo didn't try to defend himself. His voice thick with emotion, he admitted he'd been a coward. He said he was afraid of seeing her destroyed by his family and thought pushing her away was an act of love. Now, though, he understood it was really selfishness disguised as sacrifice. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes despite her efforts to stay strong. She couldn't hold back the old pain anymore. Leo's eyes were also glistening. He took a step toward her but stopped short, respecting her space. It was the first time in years they had allowed themselves to be this vulnerable in front of each other. They continued working, but something had shifted. The wall between them was beginning to crack, not because they were forgetting, but because the truth was finally out in the open. That night, Clara looked at Leo differently, not as the man who had broken her, but as someone who had also been broken in the process. Still, forgiveness felt a long way off. Trust felt even farther away. The past was now laid out between them. What came next would depend on whether they could face that truth and decide if something new could be rebuilt from the wreckage. The truth sparked a fire of anger in Clara, but it also awakened something in Leo, a newfound courage. He knew he could no longer live under his mother's shadow or allow Clara to become a target of manipulation again. So he made a choice. He would confront the empire that had shaped him and shattered his love. His family responded with quiet violence. Tense meetings multiplied. Advisors pressured him to distance himself from Clara once more. The matriarch, cold and sharp, repeated that he had a legacy to protect and that the journalist was still a threat. But for Leo, there was no turning back. Clara watched his inner battle closely. Despite the pain she still felt, she couldn't deny the courage he was showing now. For the first time, she saw him willing to lose everything rather than repeat the mistakes of the past. It moved her, but it also scared her. The external attacks intensified. False news stories began to circulate, attempting to tarnish Clara's reputation. It was the same strategy as before, but this time she wasn't alone. Leo stepped in publicly, making it clear that he stood by her side, leaving no room for doubt or speculation. His mother, enraged, played her final card. She threatened to expose secrets that could destroy not only Clara, but the family empire itself. But Leo was no longer afraid of the consequences. He decided to bring the family's darkest secrets into the light, even if it meant ruin. Clara tried to talk him out of it, fearing the sacrifice would be too great. But Leo insisted, "I'd rather lose everything than keep living under invisible chains. That's what tore us apart once. I won't let it happen again." A final confrontation was brewing, not just against his family, but against years of silence, fear, and submission. Leo was ready to fight, for Clara and for himself.
And as she watched his determination, Clara felt the walls around her heart slowly begin to soften. Leo's decision had immediate consequences. In a historic press conference, he publicly revealed documents exposing his family's corrupt practices, calling out the schemes that had propped up their empire for decades. It was an act of courage that shook the business world and stunned the public. Standing beside him, Clara watched with a mix of pride and apprehension. She knew this was more than just settling scores. It was Leo's liberation. By tearing down the veil of silence, he had finally become the man she always believed was there all along. The fallout was devastating. The matriarch lost her power, shareholders rebelled, and the empire plunged into crisis. But Leo remained steady. He knew the cost was high, yet for the first time in years, he could breathe freely. There were no more masks to wear. Faced with his vulnerability, Clara was forced to confront her own feelings. The man she had learned to hate was now willing to sacrifice everything for her. It was impossible not to recognize how much he had changed. But doubt lingered. Could she truly forgive the past without losing herself again? Leo, exhausted but resolved, asked for nothing more than understanding. He told Clara he didn't expect immediate forgiveness, only a chance to prove, day by day, that he was worthy of her trust. His words weren't grand, but they carried a sincerity that moved her deeply. That night, Clara cried alone. She cried for the young woman who had been deceived, for the woman who had built walls to protect herself, and for the journalist who now had to decide whether to tear them all down for love. Her choice was hers, and hers alone. The next time they met, their eyes held in silence. There was still pain there, but also hope. Clara hadn't said yes yet, but she hadn't said no either. And for Leo, that hesitation alone felt like a spark of possibility.
The sacrifice had been made. Now the final decision rested with Clara, to forgive or to move forward alone. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Leo's empire was shaking, but he seemed freer than ever. Clara watched closely, torn between the professional who needed to stay objective and the woman whose heart still raced when she was near him. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken questions. One rainy morning, Leo came to see her. No tie, no CEO posture, just a tired but honest man. "I can't change the past, Clara, but I can choose who I want to be from now on, and I want to be someone by your side." The sincerity in his words disarmed her. Clara took a deep breath, feeling tears begin to form. For years, she had promised herself she would never again let Leo have power over her. But now, it wasn't about power, it was about choice. He wasn't the same spoiled young man who had walked away from her. He was marked by life, transformed by love and pain. She reached out a hesitant hand, and Leo held it like someone clinging to safe harbor. There were no grand promises, only the conscious decision to try again. The flame that had never truly gone out finally had room to reignite. Over time, the corporate scandal was overcome with effort and patience. Leo rebuilt the company with new values, more ethical, more transparent, and Clara, in turn, continued her strong career, now with even greater respect for having weathered the storm beside him without losing her integrity. Together, they became a symbol of change, a businessman who challenged his family, and a journalist who never compromised the truth. They showed that love and power didn't have to work against each other. Their relationship wasn't a perfect fairy tale. Both knew trust would have to be rebuilt step by step. But this time there was equality. Clara was no longer the vulnerable young woman. Leo was no longer the arrogant heir. They were partners, standing side by side. One quiet evening, sitting together on a porch, Clara looked at Leo and whispered, "You broke me once. Now you have the chance to put me back together. Don't waste it." Leo simply smiled, tears in his eyes, silently promising not to make the same mistake again. This new beginning wasn't just about them, it was about everything they had become. The past would always be a shadow, but also proof that true love can survive time, pride, and even pain. And so, hand in hand, they chose to face the future, no longer as heir and journalist, but as two hearts that, against all odds, still beat as one. So tell me, would you forgive someone who broke your heart if they tried to put it back together? If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel now and join us for more unforgettable emotions, because here, every video is a new chance to fall in love.